5G's already happened almost. A lot of networks are being built out. Look at what's happening in China and the US, and even here in the UK, where there's a swap out going on. But a lot of networks have already been built, and they've already selected their vendors and decided what they're going to do. They're not going to replace that again in a hurry. They're not going to do that for 6 or 7 years. So,
and what's in it for them? Where's the ROI? Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. We are against all odds. It's been about a week and a half since the last one because we didn't think we'd be able to come into the office. But although there's sort of lockdown, it's not like the proper lockdown before.
Sorry.
Yeah, you couldn't get that out of the way before I started talking, could you? Where you're sort of locked down, but you can go to work and there's all sorts of stuff you can do.
It's a bit weird, really, because there's a lot of cars on the road as well, I've noticed, and people wandering around, don't know where they're going. But
what you can't do is go to the pub.
No.
So
that's the only bit I care about, unfortunately. So
we brought the pub to us. So we brought in you brought in a bunch of IPAs. This Goose is very good.
It's a hemisphere session IPA.
Yeah, but the star's got to be the star's got to be. I'm going to give a shout out to lovely Dee and lovely Elena of Liberty PR agency, and also the lad who got my address, whose name I can't remember. Sorry, but I'm sure you're lovely too. So they just decided to. So Dee's the founder and Elena's the CEO. They just decided to send me a box of beers.
That's very nice.
We've been conversing on a lot of byline bit, but basically Dee just likes getting people pissed.
Well, you feel free to send her my address.
Do you know what I mean? I will. Well, hopefully I'll flag this up to her when we put it up to know that she got a shout out, and then she'll make a little note in her people who need to get pissed book, which she doubtless has over in Portugal, where she hangs out most of the time. Actually, Dee's a complete legend, that sort of thing. They used to do a thing called Liquid Lunch, and it'd be one of those old school sort of PR things where you clock off about midday. Back when we actually had teams and underlings and things like that, and you'd say to your underlings, don't expect to hear from me for the rest of the day. And then it'd be like a 12-hour session.
How often did Liquid Lunch happen?
It was just once a year.
Right,
but I think the further back you go, the more these PR journalist piss-ups happened. Yeah. And now, even before the lockdown, they were, there just weren't that many people with sort of these old school philosophy.
Yeah, there's a few of them going on, weren't there, I suppose, before, but...
Yeah, CC Group would normally get us pissed at least once
I'm
a
hoping
year.
for a surge of interest in it all after lockdown, because I think people
are
going to be sort
all
of
the pent up
frustration and an urge to get away from online events.
Yes.
Shouldn't say that, really, obviously.
No, I mean, we did one or two. CC did one or two sort of Zoom piss-ups, but it was fun, but not quite the same, is it?
No.
So anyway, thanks a lot, Dee. I hope you listen to this, and thanks a lot, Elena, and thanks a lot, that other lad. I've got to mention it because there were plenty of sort of fairly normal beers, but among them were these Belgian Trappist monk beers.
Mine's called Triple, and it's 8%.
Yeah, no, it's just called La Trappe. You can't even read it. You haven't drunken it yet, and you can't read it. Oh, okay, fair enough. Well, and mine's called Quack or Quack. Quack. I mean, I don't understand.
That's a brilliant name. That's like the sort of beer they test in Men Behaving Badly.
Yeah, exactly.
Next to
Do you remember that? I remember that
something.
episode. That was a classic one where they end up on the floor singing "We Are Sailing" by Rod Stewart. So I'm going to try a bit of this bad boy. This is 8.4%.
I'm going to give a shout out as you drink to our listeners in Down Under, in Campbelltown. I'm assuming it's pronounced Campbelltown, like it's spelled Campbell, like.
Yeah, and then town.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go with that.
Campbelltown.
Okay,
pretty,
cool, hello.
Big listeners.
It's a bit medicinal, that.
Yeah.
It's like something you drink when you've got COVID.
Oof.
Well, there we are. Okay, well, they're our big listeners, are they? Do we even know which part of Australia that is?
The past week. Oh, well.
Is it some bit of the outback where, for some reason, they sort of
Google
fetishise the telecoms industry?
I'll check. It's... everyone in Australia is like, it's there, motherfuckers.
Oh, that's Scotland.
They'll say it's part of Sydney or something.
I think you've got the wrong Campbelltown there.
There's one in England.
That doesn't look very
Is there
Australia-shaped.
like a big data centre there or something? Or have you been writing about Australia this week?
In New South Wales.
We have written about Telstra a bit. So it could be that. New South Wales.
Outside Sydney, yeah.
They had a big restructuring, didn't they, or something?
Yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah.
I can't really talk about it because Nick and Mary have been doing that one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Talking about shout-outs, we also need to have a shout-out. I'm not going to name them, but I got an email this week from someone who's really senior in the civil service, in the Treasury Department, in charge of telecoms spend. And he says he listens to the podcast all the time and recommends his team listens to it.
He or she.
Or she, or some sort of bit on the spectrum in between. Got to cover that.
Mm-hmm.
And they were saying that it's really useful. And I was thinking, well, goddamn, our just sort of pointless dribbling might be informing government policy or state sector policy. So cheers, thanks for that shout out. That was much appreciated. It was nice to hear that people actually find the pod useful.
Yeah.
We will now endeavour through this 8.4% beer to make it less useful this time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that was a fairly long preamble before I even got to the point. Just to remind you that if you're watching this on the site or on YouTube or on Facebook, you can listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify and loads of other podcasting platforms. What are we going to talk about this week? You wrote, and I actually haven't read it, so I'm kind of groping in the dark here, but I know because you just told me that you wrote a big thing about 6G, and I thought it's always fun to talk about 6G. So I thought we'd head off with that. Then I wrote a thing about sort of antitrust, the sort of big tech monopoly behaviour, and I think that's interesting. So I'm going to bang on about that for a bit. And then inevitably we're going to talk about Huawei because all our most read stories on Telecoms.com this week were Huawei. There wasn't one super big story.
Attention.
But yeah, it's just sort of bits and bobs, and it's just a license to print reads for me. Yeah. I could just write sort of Huawei.
Just put Huawei, nothing else in the headline.
Huawei gets up, has a coffee, walks the dog, and that'll get me loads of reads. Yes.
You just have an article that says Huawei.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Huawei and shit. So that's what we're going to do. So I will therefore hand the ball over to you on 6G. What did you write about?
Well, there's quite a lot of noise about 6G recently, which is interesting because it's still obviously a long way from us getting to anything in the market. I think most people are talking to the 2030 time frame, which is maybe a bit, you talk about that sort of cycle of technologies normally think 7 to 10 years, so it would be a little bit longer than normal, I guess, if it's going to emerge in 2030.
Haven't we, with generations of mobile, haven't we been going once a decade, more or less on the decade?
Yeah, so 3G licenses, I remember being involved in that whole process. That was 2000 and 2001, and I think launching sort of 2003 most places. Where it was coming out
so it has
2002, 2003 maybe, and then I think you had 4G in 2010. And 5G is obviously, 2019, 2018, late 2018, maybe the first ones?
Well, the first
claiming to be. Yeah. So it would...
Yeah, the first time some American MNO made it up.
Made 4G out to be 5G. But, so if it's 2030, then it's maybe a bit longer. But it's interesting, there's quite a lot happening. Especially in the US, there's kind of a few companies there that have got together in the past few weeks and been making, sort of banging the drum about it, and I think it's playing into geopolitics to a certain extent. I think this is one of the things that makes 6G quite interesting compared with, the last 20 years.
But it's certainly true that telecoms has never been anywhere near as political as it is now.
Yeah, and that's really the interesting thing about 6G. I mean, I was triggered to write it, really, I suppose, by just sort of some of the activity that's been happening in America in the market. You've also, our friends Huawei have been talking about 5.5G this week, it seems. So they're sort of looking at what comes next to some extent, and every now and again they have something that they release to do with 6G. And
they actually said 5.5G. Yes, I missed that. Was that at one of their little sort of conference
Robert
things?
Covered it for us today. It was at one of their conferences, and they were talking about things that 5.5G would do. One of the things being better uplink capacity, because as Pierre will tell you, having tried out his new phone, uplink capacity is absolutely rubbish on 5G.
So have you got the new iPhone, the 12?
Yeah. And I was just telling him I get 330 megs down, but 20 megs up.
Right.
What is this?
When you can get onto, and you're on 3 as your operator.
Yeah, so it's not great, but I had full bars 5G by the window, 330 down, 20 up, 18 up.
It's quite a big ratio difference. So
Why
one
is
of the
that?
things 5.5. I don't know, to be honest. I mean, it's.
I remember learning a little bit about some of the basic technologies behind the radio, like FDD and TDD and all that sort of thing, and basically, you either have one stream where you alternate between up and down, or you have two parallel streams, one for up and one for down. Is that right? In a very simplified way?
I think frequency division duplexing does it where you have two channels that go either way, and I think time division duplexing, it kind of does it on intervals.
Oh, on intervals, right? Yeah. Sorry, yeah.
So you like, it closes down the down channel, and then it gives you the opportunity to send your traffic up and doesn't crash into anything coming the other way, sort of thing. And
it's
then
got like traffic lights in the radio signal.
It's like a traffic light as opposed to a sort of 2-lane highway. Or whatever.
And exponents of each will say they have their advantages.
I don't know why. I mean, I suppose 20 is fairly good compared with what we've perhaps had before, but. There's always been a big difference there, I suppose, on the uplink. And
so do we think that the reason there is this big difference is they're trying to sort of maximise download speeds by sort of sacrificing a bit of
maybe. I suppose if it's mainly been a mobile technology, is there a lot of upload happening in that? I mean, upload has never been something that's
a high priority.
That's been a high priority, even in fixed line. You know, you talk to
Pierre who do videos and stuff.
Yeah, isn't the whole 5G experience?
It is for him, yeah.
Isn't the whole 5G experience about, if you play video games and it's on the edge, whatever? Isn't the whole point of being able to upload loads of megs per second? I don't know.
I would have thought so. I mean, if you're going to have a full sort of like AR, VR, or mobile gaming thing, you obviously need to be able to upload. But I would imagine that the download's still more important because that'll be where you're getting most. If it's a game, that'll be where you're getting most of the game data. The upload, all you need to do is be able to upload location and movements and that sort of thing.
This sort of gets me onto one of my 6G points, which was that in some. I talked to a couple of people. I talked to someone at InterDigital, which is a research company that owns quite a few 5G patents. It's a player in that.
Pretty good on the geeky stuff, aren't they?
And Ericsson came out with quite an interesting white paper about 6G as well, some of the sort of features that it would have and things it was trying to do. And we talked a bit about this before, but I mean, to me, increasingly, it seems like 6G is maybe trying to sort out some of the problems that 5G hasn't. Which is quite odd in a way, considering 5G is only just really kind of getting going, and we still haven't seen 5G enter the business market yet. You talk to people about what their expectations of 6G are, and they sort of say, well, it's kind of more of the same. Yeah.
But isn't that consistent with 4G and 3G?
No. So this is one of my points was that I feel these generations are becoming that is not consistent with the previous Gs. If you look at what happened with
4G make 3G better?
Yeah. So if you go through the journey, 1G and 2G basically, which was if you had to pitch that to somebody, what is 1G and 2G technology? It's you can go down to the pub or the office and you can take a phone with you.
Yeah.
And we
bricks,
but we grew up in the 80s when you used to have to phone someone on your rotary phone and arrange to meet them and then hope that they'd turn up there. That was a major revolution to actually put mobile, to have a mobile device that you could take around with you.
Because then you could bail at the last minute.
And then 3G should have been equally revolutionary. The idea of having an internet sort of service on a mobile device.
Mobile broadband.
Yeah, and it wasn't that long after people had started using fixed line broadband even, and not that long after the dial-up years. So the idea of being able to have this on a mobile device, again, it was a really revolutionary thing. And the only reason it disappointed is because it just wasn't very good. The technology just didn't measure up. The devices weren't good. The form factors were all wrong. It took sort of Apple to sort that out, really. So 4G, when it did come along, it sort of fixed that problem. And then you had this smartphone revolution.
But it also fixed the bandwidth problem, because 3G
it fixed the entire data,
when you got to
mobile
HSPA
data
plus, the download speed wasn't really adequate.
It wasn't
for
great, and 4G came along, and I think has it fixed that problem, and it ushered in the smartphone revolution. I think it's fair to say,
fully, yeah.
And we're now at a point when, I mean, all this gives 5G a pretty high bar, to kind of jump over, and I think anybody who's sensible would say it's failed to do that.
Right.
It's been a very underwhelming technology so far. We're in the early days of
God
it.
knows they overpromised.
There's been a lot of coverage recently about people having services in Korea in some of these markets where they've got millions of customers and not really seeing a huge amount of difference. And there's quite a lot of pushback, I think, against it. Apple came out with its device that Pierre's got, but it's sort of pinned its.
There's some Gallic shrugs for those off-camera who can't see what Pierre's saying.
It's like, I haven't noticed much difference.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it talked a lot about 5G and in its, which is unusual for Apple to do that, to kind of foreground the network technology so much in launching a device. But it didn't really have anything to go with it. You know, there was no kind of 5G app store, a killer app store. So it's all been a bit underwhelming. Now, we might have things that come along in the business market in the next few years that you know, that are more revolutionary, perhaps. But at the moment, 6G, I think, is going to, you know, it looks like it could be an even harder sell than 5G is turning out to be. It could be even less marketable, I think, than 5G. Because all it seems to be, you know, you talk to people who are, and the research work started, if you talk to Interdigital, there's a lot of consensus about what it should have. And it does seem to be sort of more of the same, you know, so...
But done properly.
Yeah, going up into even higher ranges, for instance, so bringing in sort of terahertz frequencies, and then you can get potentially sort of hundreds of gigabits a second on a device. We were talking about this before you came in, but you've then got all these sort of propagation problems that you have to get past.
Well, as we always joke about, you've got to be sat on the base station.
Honey, can you download this? Oh, it's raining, sorry.
Then you've got sort of the latency.
Yeah.
So you're talking about, I think, sub 10 millisecond latency, ideally on 5G perhaps in the future, whereas they're kind of talking about getting down to even below 1 millisecond on 6G. There's no, I mean, the big problem, one of the big problems at the moment is there's no use cases really that go along with this. I mean, one that Interdigital was citing was XR, you know, extended reality, which is kind of
Qualcomm word, I think.
It's sort of linking together different realities, so kind of augmented and virtual and mixed and kind of hybrid, and then it provides all the kind of digital glue between them.
It's all getting to this sort of Elon Musk brain in a jar utopia.
And then another thing it might do is so Interdigital was talking about like mash up, you know, the famous 5G triangle where you've got EMBB and then low latency and
IoT for some reason.
And then the IoT one. Yeah. Maybe combinations of the two. One thing that 5G doesn't do very well is if you wanted to provide a service that takes advantage of two of those characteristics, you might need two or more dedicated network slices to do it. And they're saying it's not a particularly elegant way to provide that service. And maybe 6G can come up with a way around that.
Well, go on.
No, sorry, because I keep listening to you, and it's crazy how it seems it's a lot to do with marketing.
Oh, it always is.
Because I remember going to that event with you. That was 3 years ago. E and Qualcomm at Wembley, where they were showcasing gigabit LTE. And I remember telling Gabriel Brown, like, why don't they call this 5G? As a consumer, I'll buy it. So you're saying, like, you know, 6G is going to fix everything that 5G couldn't, but surely, I mean, gigabit LTE could have been 5G, and then 5G could have been 6G, could have been 5G, if you know what I mean. Like,
well, it almost should have been the other way around. 4G should be 3G, really, and what we're on now should be 4G.
So there's two things I want to say about that. Like, maybe we were talking about a sort of decade cadence. Maybe we've got a 20-year cadence, but we just, for marketing purposes, as Pierre was just saying, we break it into
pandemics.
Two. Yeah. You know, we only really got mobile broadband right in 4G. So you could argue that's a 20-year cycle for mobile broadband.
Yeah.
So we had a 20-year cycle for voice, 20-year cycle for mobile broadband. Now, what's the utopia now? I think the ultimate aim is just ubiquitous connectivity, isn't it? Where absolutely everything, these cameras, you know, you could even have chips in these beers.
Is that the ultimate aim? That's the industry's ultimate aim.
I think this is one of. If we try and simplify, I definitely try and do this as much as possible.
But you don't need
bogged down in the weeds.
You could do that with technologies at the moment.
Well, but not reliably and robustly.
Well, so we say with what reliably and robustly.
Well, let's just say you didn't even need to think about it. Pierre just knew that video camera that's filming me right now was connected to the cloud. He doesn't even need to worry about recording it on his laptop.
Yeah.
Everything's always recorded in the cloud. Everything's always accessible via the cloud. And for that to be the case, everything has to be always connected to the cloud via a robust connection with high enough bandwidth that you don't even need to worry about it. So he could be recording this in 4K and he wouldn't need to worry about it.
No more memory cards? That could be cool.
No more memory cards, all that sort of stuff. So let's just say, I mean, by all means disagree that is a utopia, but let's say that's what it is. Let's say we had voice, then mobile broadband, and then ubiquitous, robust connectivity.
Well, that's supposed to be what 5G is.
Yeah, but it isn't.
No, and this is the thing I'm thinking, is that perhaps 6G really is sort of clearing up the mess that 5G's left.
I think we're agreeing with each other.
The even Gs often seem. I think there's a sort of theory going around that the odd G, not a theory, but an idea going around that the odd Gs are always disappointing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Gs
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Except 1G, that was, come on.
But I think one of the problems with we've talked about the consumer side of 5G quite a lot, the smartphones, and how it's all a bit underwhelming because nobody needs 500 megabits a second on their phone and you can pretty much do everything on 4G anyway. So we're waiting for this business story. The problem for me with the business story is that they got the technology ready almost in a way ahead of the... I mean, maybe that's not fair, but... Well, I don't know if that's fair. I just don't think... Maybe neither of them is ready, but I think one of the big problems is I don't see most organisations making this dramatic shift in the next 5-6 years to, I mean, you talk to, you look at a lot of companies, a lot of bricks and mortar companies that are struggling to evolve to an online way of working and to take advantage of just basic connectivity. And it takes them years and years to seem to move the needle even slightly. I know there are more innovative, companies, and there are the big tech giants, obviously, which are kind of exceptional, I would say. But this idea that we're going to end up in a market in 5 or 6 years' time where all devices are connected and we have these low latency factories with services being run over 5G networks that can do things that I just don't see it happening at all. I think because I don't see companies moving towards that quickly enough.
So even if the technology was perfect, even if we'd hit the utopia that I just described, you just think that there'd be a massive lag in terms of...
I think there'd be a huge lag in terms of adoption, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's
you look at survey results and a lot of companies aren't ready to adopt this stuff. I think I was there with you, or maybe it was Jamie at a conference on private networks, which is a big
lazy when
discussion point. This time last year, it was someone from Shell. The CIO of Shell actually stood up and said... I'm just more interested in 4G at the moment.
Was that an Informer one?
It was an Informer.
It was
an
old street.
Yeah, that rings a bell.
I mean, a lot of the technologies that companies need to do things like have connected factories and wire up, offices and take advantage of sort of having a basic sort of connectivity service that provides you with some productivity benefits. Yeah, that's coming and that's happening now. I think anything that's more whizzy, the sort of stuff that the slightly more outlandish stuff that you see Ericsson and the vendors talking about in their white papers, I really struggle to see any of that happening on a big scale before the next 5 or 6 years. Now, you go 5 or 6 years out, you're at a point where people are then starting to plan for 6G, yeah?
So, but
this is then starting to go into the standards process.
I'm not disagreeing with anything you say, but perhaps this lag, we agree that, for example, the modern smartphone didn't come along till about 8 years after 3G came along, which is supposed to be good for it. And then really...
What?
Yeah,
it's 2007.
The modern smartphone, the first iPhone, the first Android phones were
2007.
Yeah, but
it was 6 or 7
out?
years, whatever.
3G was a 3G phone.
You're going to get
the first iPhone
over whether it's 6 or 7 or 8, aren't you? That's what I have to
it was 7.
It was 7. Sorry, I was one off.
Wait, you're saying the iPhone came out 7 years after 3G?
Yeah, 2000, 2001 is when 3G licenses were being awarded.
See, I was too young by then. I didn't know.
So then maybe show some humility and shut up. I'm only joking, by the way, listeners. I'm not really that horrible to him. Anyway, he's young. He could just beat me up if I was. What was I going to say? Yeah, so maybe there is just a lag in terms of use case anyway. So like we always cite Uber as a typical example of something that makes good use of robust mobile broadband.
Yeah.
And, I don't know when Uber was invented, but it's only become a big deal in the last sort of,
7 years.
I
remember like when it started 2013.
I think it gets cited because it's the one that really needs 4G.
Yeah.
But actually, the 4G killer app is just, to me, it's just internet connectivity on the phone. Because no one was really using that in the days of 3G. That's been a 4G phenomenon.
Browsing websites.
Anything. Browsing,
but when
watching
do you need it
YouTube
constantly?
videos.
So obviously the sort of sat-nav stroke instant access to services. Because the thing about, I agree, obviously even web browsing was unsatisfactory under 3G.
Yeah, it took ages for a page to appear.
But there's certain things where you just need to know that you're connected all the time for it to work, like a sat-nav type of thing.
Yeah, but from a consumer demand point of view, your average smombie walking up the road...
Average what?
Smartphone zombie. You've not heard that expression?
No, I haven't.
walking up the street with the phone held out in front of them,
just like
looking at sports scores or whatever, or a BBC News page. If they'd had to do that, would never have happened in 3G because they'd have just chucked the phone down the drain in frustration.
On paper,
it should have done. Yeah.
So I actually think we're agreeing with each other that it's hard to get too excited about 6G if its big pitch is doing 5G properly.
Well, I think the most exciting thing about 6G is what's happening to the industry. So despite this, at the moment, it's seeming a little bit underwhelming and perhaps fixing some of the things 5G hasn't been able to do. And this is something we talk about all the time on the pod with Open RAN and everything, is that we're going through this period of major turmoil, I would say, in terms of geopolitics and technology. And there are huge shifts happening that we could end up with a 6G standard, or we could end up with 6G standards. We could go back to a world where...
right, you're talking like the balkanisation.
Yeah, so interesting to see what's happening in... I think some of what's driving all the sort of focus on 6G at the moment, and the fact that companies like Verizon, Apple and so on are making so much noise about it. And then on the other hand, you've got ZTE coming out with comments. Is this little sort of battle going on for... Now, that's happened, obviously, in all technologies, because countries want to stamp their mark. But what we haven't had until now, with the last 4 years of Trump sort of, leading the charge against China, is this kind of fragmentation that we're seeing, I think. And, with Huawei being shut out of European markets and concern about, what happens, what does it mean for collaboration within the 3GPP, which is a group that Huawei's been a massive part of, obviously, for the last few years.
Yeah, and I remember the Trump administration about a year ago going, "Oh yeah, you can do that."
Yeah,
it's also fragmented.
It's very fragmented, and there's a lot of people who do think that we could end up with maybe not even a 3GPP in the future. Maybe when 6G comes along, we have rival standards groups for different parts of the world.
Yeah, well, actually, one of the Huawei stories I'm going to talk about later sort of overlaps on what you just talked about.
And then I think the other thing that's going on, which is really related to that, is the whole kind of Open RAN, softwareization, cloud story, which is something that, InterDigital was saying this. The 5G technologies that are getting rolled out at the moment. This is the interesting thing, that when people talk about Open RAN and how quickly it's going to get adopted. You talked to Howard Watson, who's the CTO of BT, about when he thinks he's going to be able to introduce Open RAN, and he says 2027. Is late 26, early 2027 is the earliest that he'll be able to introduce Open RAN.
Okay.
Why is that? Because he's just building out a 5G network now using traditional gear from traditional providers that isn't based on open interfaces, that isn't based on virtualization, and he's building this network across the UK. And is he going to get rid of that in a couple of years' time and depreciate all the costs and stick in an Open RAN network? Of course,
you wrote a big sort of analysis piece on Open RAN, and it was a bit. There was that last week.
A couple of weeks ago, maybe.
A couple of weeks ago. I don't know if we ever chatted about it, but it seemed quite sceptical, was it?
Well,
remind us what your
I do quite a lot on Open
RAN.
RAN. What was the protectionism one? Or?
Yeah, I think so. It's quite long and detailed and had charts. And
I suppose that ties in with what I'm talking about now in terms of fragmentation.
That's what made me think of it.
Companies trying to sort of promote national champions.
Why is it a protection racket? What's that? Justify that headline.
Because I think companies are using it as a way to, they sort of see. I mean, it's very odd to hear government ministers stand up and start talking about Open RAN as a way to kind of promote national champions, which has definitely happened in the UK. It's clearly happening in Japan. It's clearly happening in the US.
So this is all.
So it's clearly happening in India.
This is all.
More maybe than anywhere.
Anything that's not Chinese.
I think there's a huge push for homegrown technologies going on, and I think countries see Open RAN as a way of doing it because they can't possibly create another Nokia, but they see Open RAN as an opportunity to seed software companies
and let their lads like
disruptive.
Intel and Qualcomm.
And clearly it's not going to work because you're not going to, even with disaggregation and the stuff that's happening on the technology side, a market's not going to be able to support dozens and dozens of small Open RAN players. It will consolidate into a few companies. So.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree that it can't support it, but I do agree that the inevitability of market forces is towards consolidation.
Yeah.
But I mean, you could, in theory, be one little widget maker that makes one little widget that goes in a RAN and just be really good at that. I mean, that would be a supportable business model, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, if you can get the scale economies, I suppose, doing that. I mean, that's the trouble, isn't it? That this is one of the problems, I think, with Open RAN and protectionism, is that if you have if every country wants to have its own Open RAN kit makers and they want to use them for their own national networks, and they don't want to take advantage of, they don't want to use kit from other countries, that's a very fragmented market. You know, one of the attractions of globalization supposedly is that we get these major scale economies. And you talk to Ericsson, they say this is the reason mobile's been so can't even speak now, so successful over the last 20 years is because we can, you know, we've got 100,000 staff building networks in, you know, every country of the world. You know, we're serving a market of 8 billion subscribers ultimately. So
what they really want is a way of doing as much of the mobile network as possible without involving any of the current big guys. Especially the Americans want a way of doing it. I think some
by
getting loads of American companies involved. You know, they're obviously not hostile to Nokia and Ericsson, but they are at the very least cognizant of the fact that having conspired to rule ZTE and Huawei out of markets, they've created a natural duopoly, and that's never good.
Yeah,
it's only one better than a monopoly by definition. So so they're working on that, and as I think you're completely right. That's the driver for a lot of that Open RAN stuff.
It is, but there's a reason why the industry's consolidated, I guess, down to just 3 players. You know, isn't there? It's all very well. This is the thing that I always find curious, is that the operators go around complaining that the industry's consolidated.
So who was around? But when you've been in this sector longer than I have, who could you get to help you? I mean, we're not going to count those that are still around, like Samsung as well. But back in the day,
well, okay,
who else that's no longer around? Okay, which is bought. Okay,
Nortel, Motorola.
I tell you what. Talking about Nortel, I've got this one thread comment thread, which we might cover on the Huawei thing, where people are really going for it,
right.
And someone's just gone about how Nortel was just destroyed by the Chinese conspiracy, and then the pro-Chinese people are just accusing him of this, that, and the other, and it's just going backwards and forwards.
Bloomberg wrote a big piece on this about Nortel.
Maybe that's where it's coming from.
But the interesting thing is that you go back, there were sort of maybe 7 to 10 kit makers doing radio access network equipment that were fairly big, and we're now in a situation where there's 3 big ones, I would say, and possibly 2 because of, as you say, if they get rid of Huawei. But you know, I mean, I was on a call, not a call, I just listened in on a parliamentary session with the head of the UK's new task force, Ian Livingstone, and also Tariq Amin, actually, from Rakuten.
Right.
And they were quizzing them about, and Ian Livingstone specifically got asked, was the industry culpable in what's happened here? You know, and, you know, what regulators, he was actually asked, do you think Ofcom is partly to blame for this? Because the regulators are supposed to say when mergers happen, that this isn't good. You know, this is what regulators are supposed to do, isn't it? They're supposed to come along and say this would be anti-competitive and it would be an issue, and you know, we need to sort of keep an eye on this. And yet,
but they haven't got a clue, have they?
Well, have they not got a clue? I mean,
they need to listen to our podcast like that bloke from the civil service. I mean, he's got a clue.
I'm curious to the Alcatel-Lucent Nokia deal, which is very recent. That's 2016, yeah, and that didn't encounter any regulatory objections at all. The merger of 2 huge players with massive market power, and they allowed them to combine, and then suddenly everybody's complaining about, we've only got 3.
And then they probably had some crude rationale, which was like, well, one's mobile and the other's fixed line, so that's all right.
But of course they weren't, because merging their mobile businesses has been one of the biggest hassles for them, and they had, you know, they both had huge RAN businesses, so. It's caused problems partly because, you know, one of the reasons I think they fell behind in the whole 5G race, which they have done, they've admitted that themselves, having problems, is because of this sort of merger headache they've had to deal with. But
which anyone could have told them
now about needing more competitors in the market, and they want Open RAN because it's a way of injecting competition. But surely they were partly responsible for what's happened.
Yeah.
They all complain about being ripped off by the equipment makers and that they can't get. You know, they don't get low-cost equipment that they'll get with Open RAN. You look at the margins that Nokia and Ericsson are making. Operators make much bigger margins. The profits are accruing to operators, not accruing to equipment
Well, that's one of the reasons
makers.
I flagged up your thing from a couple of weeks ago, just wondering what your angle was. Because to me, one of the things... So I agree with Open RAN, and we've hardly spoken about 6G, but I think we've spoken about it in the context of...
Yeah. Well, I think 6G comes into because I think this Open RAN is actually more of a 6G story perhaps than a 5G one, because 5G equipment being rolled out now is not Open RAN, and it's not going to get replaced quickly because they've just spent a huge amount of money on it and they'll want to depreciate it. And that's why people like Howard Watson at BT is saying, I'm not going to use Open RAN till 2027. So it's all very well for our friends at Vodafone to make a big deal about swapping out 2,600 sites, but they've had to swap those anyway because they're Huawei sites.
Well, it's interesting that Howard Watson says that, because what I was just going to say, and I'm sure we've said it before, is as well as Open RAN having a geopolitical element, and we're going to have to move on after this, it's also just a really handy stick for operators to beat vendors with on price.
Yeah,
they can try and bluff a bit, and Vodafone's chatting to Ericsson or whoever, and they're about to buy a bunch more base stations, and they go, "Wow, it's a bit pricey, if I'm honest." Sven or whoever they're talking to, I might just go Open RAN, save myself a few quid.
Yeah, but I don't think this Open RAN as a lower cost option side of things is a very convincing story anyway.
Okay.
I don't think that's why operators are doing Open RAN, and I don't think there's any strong evidence that Open RAN will be cheap. The only company that makes a big deal of this is Rakuten, which says that its capex is 40% lower than it would have been if it had gone traditional, and its opex is 30% less. Now, the thing about Rakuten is it's a greenfield deployment, yeah? So they've been able to build and architect their network in a totally different way. They haven't got a 2G network or a 3G network to look after. They haven't got all that other sort of fixed line rubbish that BT's looking after. And they've just been able to do things in a much more simple way. They've got, I think their engineering force is about 1/20th the size of Japanese rivals. So I think a lot of the cost savings probably come from that. And they've also been...
But it's one thing to do it from a standing start, it's another to do it...
This is the other reason they've got a cost difference, is because Tariq Amin is... You don't get CTOs like that very often. He was asked about this on a call this week, actually.
A special one, is he?
He went to NEC. So
he's a bit of a Mourinho of the telecoms world.
Well, he was asked about the cost side of things on the call that they had this week when they were reporting results, and wasn't my question, but he basically said that they have a very good he used to work in the vendor side himself, I think.
Okay.
So he said, we have an extremely good understanding of what components cost and what you can charge us. Now, they're also in a market where they have an equipment maker, NEC, which isn't something that an operator in France or the UK could say.
So that's further
What
insight.
they did is they went to NEC and they said, you're going to build equipment for us as basically a design house for Rakuten, and we will agree with you profitability targets that you can make, and you will be entirely transparent about all the costs. And that's how this relationship's going to work. Backed by the Japanese government saying we like this arrangement very much because it could give rise to a new way of doing things that appeals to everybody around the world saying we want Open RAN so much. And massive boost to NEC. I don't think it's a situation that is you're going to see replicated in a lot of other parts of the world. And I think the main reason people want Open RAN is diversity, is competition. They don't want to be reliant on two vendors. Whether they get the cost savings, I think, is yet to be seen. There's a big concern they end up spending more in operating costs. And if you ask Ericsson, when it had its Cloud RAN announcement, I remember asking, I think it's Per Narvinger, the guy who did that, about the cost savings. He said there's no way that this stuff's going to be lower cost. If we can't do something lower cost when it's dedicated equipment
and that's about
it's
strident
designed
as
for a
Ericsson's
market for 8 billion, then this is not about lower cost. This is about innovation and catering to enterprise opportunities, perhaps, and
manufacturing competition, as you say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dealing with architectures that operators want in the future. But
the talk about competition gives me the perfect excuse to move it on. Not that that's not interesting. We talk about it for a while, and I think,
But the 6G thing, just to sort of...
Well, the concept of 6G is doing 5G properly.
I think this will happen more in the 6G era, I think, a lot of it, because I just think 5G's already happened almost. A lot of networks are being built out. Look at what's happening in China and the US, and even here in the UK, where there's a swap out going on, but a lot of networks have already been built, and they've already selected their vendors and decided what they're going to do. They're not going to replace that again in a hurry. They're not going to do that for 6 or 7 years. So,
and what's in it for them? Where's it ROI?
Well, you're writing off a huge amount of costs, so you'll keep that there. And then when 6G is starting to come into view, I'm not saying they will necessarily wait for 6G before they do their next swap, but I certainly think we'll be talking more about 6G when Open RAN, becomes a more significant thing, perhaps.
Fair enough. So so on the competition segue, I looked this up the other day, actually. Segway, as a transition, is spelt SEGUE.
Oh.
Yeah. What were you just going to do?
As opposed to one of those things that you...
Get some more beers.
As opposed to one of those things you ride around.
Exactly. It's easy to imagine it's spelt SEGWAY in both cases, but it's not.
SEGUE.
Yeah, it was also pronounced Segway. You'd think it would be pronounced Segu. Or something like that.
We need him here.
Yeah, we need him to...
Obviously is a... It's French, isn't it?
Maybe that's why he left.
Word.
He thought we'd start doing shit French impressions.
Yeah, he had the word Segway. He thought, I'm getting out of here now.
But anyway, I digress. Competition. So there is an increasing... this is only sort of semi-telecoms, but on Telecoms.com we quite often write about just tech industry or whatever, because as we've just been discussing, it all overlaps anyway. Yes, Google. So we know that there's, we talk about the FANGs, which is like Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, and you can throw one or two others in there. But there's these sort of...
Or BAT.
What's that?
Do you not know BAT?
No.
You must know BAT. Do you know who BAT is?
Right,
in the context of FANG, do you know who BAT is?
What?
No, he doesn't.
Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent.
Oh, okay, so you're talking about a Chinese equivalent.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and obviously there's others that we haven't put in there that aren't so much first and foremost internet companies like Microsoft, which are no less huge.
Well, I think the only reason Microsoft is not in FANG is because it doesn't work very well, does it? Yeah. There's got to be another one where you can get it in, but
FAMAG.
I don't think Apple belongs in there anyway, to be honest. Does it?
Well, anyway, let's get to that. Let's get to that because I think it may do. But the point is, you have these super big internet companies or technology companies, and that in itself is hard to distinguish between the two. And they've all got there largely by merit. I don't think anyone's suggesting that Amazon got there because the US government supported it or because it did anything really illegal. I think nearly all successful companies probably walk the fine line a little bit, but I'm certainly not going to make any allegations, lawyers.
To be fair, sorry to go back, Microsoft deserves to be in there more than Netflix in terms of size, don't they?
In terms of pure size, I think they're one of the biggest by market cap.
If Microsoft was called Microsoft, then it would be part of
what about
FANG.
FAMG?
Yeah.
Or they could just more A's, because you can keep going, keep doing that. Anyway. Yes. And so they're all there on merit, let's just say for the sake of argument. But the problem is, when you get to a certain size, regardless of how much you earned that size, it creates competition problems. Now, there's the crude one, which is just your sheer size means that you dominate. So, for example, Amazon. I can't remember. I mean, I occasionally buy something on the internet not from Amazon, but it's probably 80 to 90% of the shit I buy on the internet is through Amazon. We might get like some sort of guitars and stuff. You go to specialist places. Pierre sent me a video clip of him playing some cool Van Halen. Yeah, he's quite handy on the guitar. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
I know, as if he wasn't cool enough already on his skateboard and his threadbare top. Anyway, and his sussy accent. So you might go to specialist places for like musical instruments or something like that. But on the whole, it's just easier to go to Amazon. Anyway, so there's that direct competition issue there. But then there's these sort of synergies or overlaps or whatever. And so there's the case of Google. So there's two things I want to mention about Google. One has been lurking around for a little while, but this consortium of about 160 companies sent a letter to the European Commission going, are you going to look into this again or what? Which is basically how Google deals with search results. So I did a screenshot from my own computer to put in the story. I just searched for printers. And you'll get a normal Google thing, but you get these thing. God, I forgot what they're called. One Box, something like that.
Like the ads, you mean?
Yeah. But there's actually got the brand name is One Box, I think. And so you get these little boxes, And it could either be boxes along the top, or it could be the ones on the side. Like if you put Croatia in, it'll give you a little picture of Dubrovnik and a Wikipedia link or something like that. But when it's commercial, it's quite often little buy links in boxes. And if you look at those for printers, just on before the fold, i.e. the first thing that came up on the screen before I scrolled, about 2/3 of them were Google. So it's 2/3 Google links, 1/3 everyone else in the whole world.
What do you mean Google? Google,
like a Google Shopping. Google has its own.
Oh right,
like
but they don't make
e-commerce.
printers. Yeah.
No, they don't make. But Google as an Amazon, as a provider, as a conduit.
But you're okay. No, keep going. But okay.
So
say it. Say what you
My
want
point
to
is
say.
that you're using a Google. You're using a Google product. Surely they're going to take you to.
Yes, perfect. So you're completely feeding into the narrative.
People are pissed off that so many people are using Google. That's the issue here.
Yes, but but this is the point of the narrative. When you reach a certain size and a certain degree of market dominance, that becomes a problem. Yeah. And if you just done that 8% one, good lad.
That's pretty strong. That
piece of cake.
I'll finish mine off of that. But the point is, when you've got 80 to 90% of all the searches, then it necessarily becomes a competition thing. You could argue, well, they've earned it and they're dominant and good luck to them. But it does become an issue.
But again, nobody's has a gun to your head saying, Scott, you have to use Google to search for things.
No.
It's just happened to be the best product.
But that is how it is.
Yeah, okay.
Network effects.
There's a network effect and there's inertia. People don't do their due diligence. When I sit down, granted, I'm a particular slave of Google because I've got Android phones. I use Gmail. I use Google Drive. I use Google Maps. I basically own me.
Yeah.
But I could just do due diligence and go, no, should I go with DuckDuckGo or Bing or whatever they call the
Bing, yeah.
Microsoft
But are they going to change it?
One of the reasons these companies are so dominant is because regulators are playing catch up all the time.
Yes,
they don't understand
definitely.
what they're dealing with, and this is quite relevant in the social media space. Actually, it's interesting now looking at Facebook and where it stands now, and turn the clock back a few years before it bought WhatsApp and Instagram.
Whether it was Pierre dropping his brand new iPhone 12, by the way.
So I got a case.
When those deals went through,
Jamie.
Nobody was raising antitrust concerns about Facebook buying Instagram or WhatsApp, which were relatively small unknown companies. But it bought them clearly to take out.
But they didn't work.
But they didn't work because they didn't see it as they didn't get the argument. And The Economist has written about this a few times that those deals probably shouldn't have been allowed to go through, and if regulators were sort of more with it, perhaps in a normal market you wouldn't allow that to happen. But they just didn't recognise what was going on.
Well, that's where you get the real dilemma, isn't it? If you're instinctively a sort of laissez-faire free marketer, as I am, then I instinctively resist government intervention in the workings of the free market. Mm-hmm. But I'm also someone who's read The Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, which was written in the 1700s, for God's sake, where he spoke about the need for regulation obliquely by saying that if you let too many people who are in the same profession get together in a little coffee house, they're going to conspire to...
Unfettered free markets would just end up with one company controlling everything.
Exactly.
Basically. So, and we'd all be sort of subservient to some private sector giant that's not democratically accountable.
100%.
I just think the where the line blurs is the thing with Google is that they had such a superior product when they started.
Yeah, and I remember. You probably don't remember.
Yeah, no, I remember.
They did, but then it's a very hard market to break into. So, even if somebody, I don't know how good Bing is, but it's supposed to be pretty good, isn't it?
And if even Microsoft can't pull it off.
They can't pull it off. No one's ever going to be able to undermine that search engine dominance that they've got, so anyway, no matter how good they are.
So that's there. And actually, while we're talking about that, a similar thing happened, and I think maybe this is one of the reasons for the timing for this letter that these people sent. And they're mainly European e-commerce people who feel that they're getting...
shafted.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever French for shafted is.
Shafted.
Yeah.
Le screwed.
Yes, just recently the European Union started a antitrust investigation into Amazon on very similar grounds. In the case of Amazon, they fulfill a hell of a lot of stuff for third parties. So often when you go onto Amazon and you buy your widget, you're not actually buying it off Amazon. You're buying it off Acme Widgets. Yeah. But they've just realised that the chances of you ever going to the Acme Widgets website, or for that matter, to go full circle, finding them on Google, is so small that they're better off giving Amazon a pound of flesh to at least get your eyeballs when you go on there. But then, even then, they're screwed, because what Amazon's doing, according to the European Commission, is that they're favouring their own products on little sidebars and on various ways in which it's displayed on the Amazon site. And they're also offering favourable terms to third parties who use their logistics and fulfilment.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but you can presumably have varying degrees of relationship with Amazon if you're a third party. You could just have a listing, but then do all the fulfilment yourself, i.e. send Dave round in a white van.
Yep.
Or you could just get Amazon to do the lot, where basically all you're really doing is providing some kind of warehousing. And then as soon as an order comes in, then you just whiz over the thing to Amazon's logistics people. And so the accusation is that Amazon favours people it gets more money off than people it gets less. Anyway, so those are two things there. But then there's a third thing to do with Google, which I found most interesting, again, as an Android user. There's a product called Google Photos, which is cloud storage for photos. And Google offers... sorry, I'm getting dry mouth here. I need some more beer.
Just, avoid the Trappist stuff.
Yeah, well, I've done that as well. You're feeling it.
Doesn't help you talk any more easily.
You're doing very well, considering you had a couple before I even turned up. A couple of gooses. So I've been using it's been free since they launched it 5 years ago. It's cloud storage for your photos. You take any photo on your Android phone, it automatically gets uploaded to the cloud. There's some quite handy chronological sorting, like if I want to sort of reminisce about what my kids looked like when they were babies or toddlers or whatever, I can just scroll down and go to 2000 and I'm trying to remember when they were
Apple
born
has a
now.
similar thing.
Sorry, iCloud, but from the email, I just want to point out, it's just hard to wrap your hand around this. They say there's 28 billion new photos and videos per week.
Right, just uploaded. Yeah.
Per week.
Well, it's not surprising because it automatically uploads and people just take photos of all sorts of shit.
Well, yeah, and the Android install base globally is about 80%.
Yeah.
So how many people are there in the world? 7 billion people are?
Yeah.
This is
so that's like 6 billion Android users.
Yeah, 4 pictures for every living person on Earth every week.
Right.
Which isn't, actually, it could be a lot more than that.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
well, a lot of people don't.
But it's a ridiculous scale, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, so they've been offering this thing for free. And what you get basically as an Android user or as someone who's got a Google account, you get 15 gigabytes of cloud storage for free off Google, which is quite generous. Fair enough. But the Google Photos didn't used to count against it, so long as you stored them in their compressed format. If you wanted them in their full sort of raw, taking up 250 megabytes format, then it would count.
Full Ansel Adams Beauty style.
Sort of thing, yeah. But if it was just in like a sort of 1080p type of compressed format, then it didn't count against it, and that's what they're changing. Now, on one level, again, back to the sort of thing where I get to put on my little sort of whingy lefty voice. It's like, well, they're a private company, they can do what I want. On one level, they are a private company and they can do what they want. But again, back to the antitrust thing, they're such a large private company with such a large influence on the overall market that it becomes the interest of the state and regulators to do it. And this is someone, a free marketeer, a laissez-faire, small state person. I have to say that there does come a time where the state needs to intervene.
Yeah.
Now, in the particular case of this, I think it's a great illustration of why sometimes regulators need to intervene, because you think, well, what have they done? They've given you something for free for 5 years, and now they're not giving it for free. Stop crying and just deal with it. But the competition implications are, while it was giving it for free, what possible hope did any other cloud photo storage provider have of making their business work?
Yeah.
I mean, no hope. Why would you give like even £1 a month?
Well, it gets into predatory pricing, isn't it? It gets into that kind of territory. I mean, it's sort of
is that a specific? Does that have a specific meaning?
You're not allowed to. I mean, there's all sorts of rules about
operate at a loss.
I don't know if it would apply to something like this because photos in the cloud is such an. But you can't do things like dumping, can you? Like selling goods below the cost of production, and it's in that sort of to get a competitive advantage. It's in that kind of.
Well,
area,
and here's back to your point about regulators catching up with reality. Regulators are probably good on that on physical goods, but not so much on digital goods. And Google obviously has the resources and the economies of scale and the complementary profitable businesses to be able to run other businesses at a loss.
Do you know what? This is a worrying issue, actually, because you think about how much these tech companies have got us all over a barrel. This goes right back to the days of email. Internet services have been free to use for years, The whole model with Hotmail and Yahoo and all those things. We all use those services all the time. Nobody pays any money to use that stuff. Imagine if they turn around and did the same thing. We've provided email to you for the last 20 years, but now we're going to start charging you for it, and you need to pay 30 quid a month. And they've got people over a barrel. Because
the way they've done it is on the slide,
because
like my attachments in Gmail count against my 15 gig. So every now and then I've got this one aunt that likes to send video attachments.
And it pushes you over your limit.
Each one's like a gig in size. And so I have to go through them every now and then and just purge them.
Wouldn't somebody come up with a free email and then people will flock to that?
But you've got your own
contacts, haven't you? You've built up this. It's like you build up your photo library. You've got this massive history of emails. You've got all your work contacts. Some people use this for freelance work. Yeah, they use their Hotmail accounts or their Hotmail. Does anyone still have any one of those?
I do.
Do you? Or I've got Yahoo Mail that I've had for years and years and years, and I'd never want to get rid of it because people know how to get in touch with me on it. It's like changing your phone number. Nobody wants to change their phone number.
Like us.
Exactly. So there's the network effect. There's inertia. There's people have got busy lives. They can't constantly audit their service providers. There's a massive amount of inertia just related to that. Yes, there's laziness as well, and ignorance, and all sorts of other reasons, and trust.
Yeah, I had a free trial with Spotify for 3 months, and I forgot to cancel it.
Right,
and now
there we go.
I actually use it, so I want it. It worked.
It worked.
I'm so annoyed.
It worked, and then when Joe Rogan goes off YouTube next year,
you'll
have to go with that as well.
He's going off it.
Yeah, well, he's
of course, because
it's like $100 million goddamn deal, and it was always said that it would be exclusively Spotify in 2021, and I think he probably could have got even more. I think it's going to be great for Spotify. He just keeps growing. Anyway, that's another tangent. Me and Pierre could obsess about Joe Rogan.
We were watching him before.
Borderline man crush. If you're watching Joe, I'll come on any time. It's fine at your convenience.
I'm starting to disagree with him now.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about it over another beer after. So just to wrap that one up, because we better move it on. The point is, when companies get as large as Google or as Amazon or as any of these FANGs and big Silicon Valley companies and big US tech companies, their capacity to behave in a anti-competitive way is enormous. The mere fact, if Google just decided, it could be almost anything, certainly anything digital.
Yeah.
So let's say I'm trying to think of something digital that Google isn't currently involved in, which is difficult. So let's just pick something analog, like just picking things I can see, like video cameras. If Google decided to get into video cameras, they could probably force Canon and all these sort of Japanese vendors out of business by offering them free for a year.
They could, yeah.
And they could be 80% as good as Canon, but people go, fuck it, it's free.
I think the big tech companies are a real worry at the moment, and I think even more so in the pandemic, because it's created a situation where it becomes more attractive to use those companies. It gives.
That was a pull to the top, yeah.
Yeah, it's we can't go to the shops, or we're discouraged from going to the shops. In fact, some are closed down. So your only means of.
Oh, it's been catastrophic.
Wales did weird things like banning people from buying non-essential goods, specifically to try and sort of. Prevent supermarkets, I think, from getting an advantage over small retailers. But in actual fact, all it did was hand an even bigger opportunity to the big web giants that you could still order from. So I think it's a real concern, actually, how powerful those companies are becoming. And
I agree.
I'm like you. I'm more sort of don't intervene when you don't have to. Don't like the idea of the government messing around in private enterprise and getting involved. But at the same time, I think. Something needs to be done. Something in a clever way, in an innovative way that's not seen as heavy-handed needs to be done to sort of rein in the tech giants, I think.
So you think we have So you don't think we have a Standard Oil thing?
I do think we have a Standard Oil thing.
Wow.
Worse than Standard Oil. This is a big societal issue for the whole planet. You don't have a Standard Oil issue. You've got a potential Skynet issue. Yeah.
Oh, you're getting into my home turf. Yeah, exactly. Yes, and
well, that's
another
not
point
good for shareholders.
Another point I made when I was writing about it is how often do you see these companies suing each other?
Yeah.
I mean, if there wasn't, I'm not saying they're operating an official cartel, but they seem to be just going, yeah, you're all right.
Yeah.
Jeff, you go over there.
Yeah.
Steve, you go over there. You go over there. We're all good. We'll divvy up 5, 6,
they
5 to 10
They can
of us.
divvy up the planet amongst themselves and eat into every other business opportunity there is.
There's some, the Google thing with Apple, where they've been paying Apple to get Google as a default search engine. Now they're starting to, apparently Apple is looking into alternatives.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, that's crazy. How?
But who is there?
Yeah. They might build one of their own, which I think is big.
On a related issue, just before I don't know, do we need to move on?
That's fine.
I was just going to say this whole, because I wrote about this today, and you sort of sent me something that someone had tweeted about it on Rakuten and the public cloud and the private cloud. I mean, there's this big conversation in telecom at the moment going on about the public cloud providers and how much they kind of get involved in that market, and there's this sort of, they're kind of eating the world. They've gone into retail. And
who have we got to choose between?
Yeah, and it's now a situation where telecoms services and IT systems and network functions are now starting to move into that environment as well. Even, and I just I don't know much about the retail sector. I don't know much about the car market, but you look at an industry that you know about, telecom. I find it I know some people are real advocates of this from a cost efficiency perspective, that's the only way that operators can survive. But the notion that all sort of functions and applications end up hosted by 3 big American cloud platforms, I find quite worrying from a kind of security perspective.
And I would say anyone who's too evangelistic about public cloud better make sure that they're doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Because this is a problem. This is a journalistic point of view. Anytime you appear to pick a team, it's perfectly reasonable to go, okay, I wonder why. And, if you're going to be really evangelistic about the public cloud, then, I wonder to what extent you have some vested interest with AWS or Google or Microsoft or whoever.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's a fact, but the problem is when you stick your neck out too far in one direction, you just... those questions
will arise,
are going to be asked.
Yeah.
So that's all I'll say about that. And we're being all discreet. Last thing, I'll keep it short and sweet because I think we've done close to an hour already, haven't we?
Mm-hmm. Really? Bloody hell!
2 minutes over already.
Already? Okay. All right. Well, I'm just going to. So actually, there's an overlap. I probably won't go through all the Huawei things. It just happens that all the stories that have been read most on the site of Huawei. I'm just going to pick on a couple of them quickly. The one that's perhaps most relevant to what we've just been talking about was one I wrote where the headline was Sweden hesitates over Huawei, over banning Huawei. Huawei seeks financial assistance from the Chinese state. And I think it's the latter bit that I think is interesting there. So the Sweden bit I'll quickly cover. So they went to ban Huawei, but they did it in a sort of weird way. They made it conditional on a future 5G auction that if you win some spectrum, you don't use Huawei or ZTE.
Yeah.
And Huawei's been pushing back legally on this stuff, which I completely respect their right to do, by the way, because why should Huawei get any less legal due process than anyone else?
Yeah.
In fact, one of their angles...
And obviously the Swedes would get full due process in China, so we should sort of...
Well, no, I mean, that's a good point. I think it's highly questionable that they would. But then you get into just pure basic morality.
Yes, we don't want to go.
But no, your point's well made. I suppose they could say Ericsson's got some of the action. Anyway. They're perfectly entitled to, and the way they're going for it, they've obviously, they got a few quid and they presumably got some decent lawyers. And when one of their angles is just discrimination, it's against European law to discriminate on the grounds of nationality. And that law probably exists primarily to police the European Union. So, Germany can't discriminate against Romania or UK while we were still in it, couldn't discriminate against Sweden or whatever. Yeah. But they're going, well, why can't it apply to China as well? So they're sort of throwing down the sort of xenophobic gauntlet, which I think is a fairly good point. I don't think I've never thought that this discrimination against Chinese companies is xenophobic. It's got nothing to do with race. It's got nothing to do with a dislike of China as a country. It's got to do with a dislike of how the Chinese politicians conduct their business.
Yeah.
But I still think that's a fairly viable legal angle for them to take. Anyway, so that's what's going on there. But then on the flip side, we've got a rumour, which isn't confirmed yet, about Huawei selling its Honor smartphone unit. Now, the Honor smartphone unit basically was created to sort of replicate the Xiaomi business model. So the normal Huawei phones are done through the sort of operator channel, through the normal telecoms channel. But Xiaomi's made a really big business out of going direct to consumer and basically circumventing the whole operator channel.
Is it more of a sort of prepaid model?
Yeah, more prepaid, more just like buy the phone.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not part of a bundle. Just buy the phone and do what the fuck you want with it.
Buy the
use
phone
it as a
and get a
paperweight
contract.
if you want.
Yeah. Not subsidised stuff, basically.
Exactly.
Yep.
Just like a normal product, like buying a Hoover.
Yep. I bought a Hoover for years.
Well, yes. And so that's what Honor is. It's Huawei's take on that. But it's useful in that it's basically quite a sort of semi-autonomous standalone business unit. And there's this rumour that they're going to flog it, and that the people who are going to buy it are all Chinese players, which is understandable to a certain degree. But then one of their supposed major purchasers is the Shenzhen government. And my take on
the Chinese government, then, basically.
Well, exactly. That was exactly my take on it. In fact, I had one person pushing back on me in the comments saying, no, it's just regional government. And I'm like, oh, come on, mate.
The regional government being the Chinese government.
Like Shenzhen government is utterly beholden to the national government and the CCP. So it just struck me as sort of state subsidy by stealth.
Yeah.
And I think that's often how they do it over there. They know that anyone who bothers to pay attention will diagnose it that way, will analyse it that way. But there's just enough deniability for them to go, nah, it's just them at Shenzhen. They're just into buying phone companies. That's what they do.
Yeah. So it was purposely the Shenzhen government. So there's one degree of separation from the actual central authorities.
Yeah, I don't have any evidence for it. That's just my gut feel.
I think nobody on the planet with any sort of iota of intelligence is going to argue.
Okay, well that's nice to know.
That the Chinese government doesn't control regional governments.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Totalitarian state, for God's sake.
Exactly. So that was an interesting thing to do with Huawei, and that has some sort of bearing on the geopolitical stuff we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And I suppose it more indirectly the competition stuff, because this is why we supposedly, like WTO rules, are supposed to prevent state intervention. It's because it's anti-competitive.
Yeah.
If you've got a company that hasn't got as good a product, but the state keeps chucking money into it until it can just suffocate all its competition by sheer weight of marketing spend or just durability, then that's not free trade, is it?
No.
So there's that, and then the other thing that was interesting, a more sort of UK focused point of view. And this is a story I wrote. It was one of those like afternoon ones where I'd had loads of other stuff on my plate, and I thought, shit, I've got to get something out. And I just spotted the press release, and I wrote it up in about half an hour, giving the game away here, aren't I? What was that? Are you making noises on your phone? He's probably looking at pictures of
some weird body part.
Kid's birthday party or something. There's a consortium of telecoms types up in like Silicon Fen, up in Cambridge.
Yeah.
Called Cambridge Wireless. I think our mate, regular podcast guest, William Webb, is one of the directors of that, or whatever, senior people in it.
Well, he's involved in that sort of circle anyway.
That's his, because he rides his bike, doesn't he, from Cambridge to London.
God, yeah.
Jesus Christ. Anyway.
Yeah, he's super fit.
He is. And they're building a private 5G network in this Cambridge Science Park, which I know because my dad used to live there, so I used to drive past it when I used to visit him. And their main vendor partner for it is Huawei. And on its surface, it's like, yeah, whatever. But the way I spun it, and it seems to have paid off in terms of reads, is like, well, this is interesting because firstly, we've got these bunch of quite venerable. Our domestic telecoms industry, such as it is probably there, and they're going, we got no problem with Huawei government, so fucking don't know what you're freaking out about so much. And then the second thing is obviously Huawei gets to have little little sound bites like they did to go with it, going, well, we're still totally dedicated to the UK, and
Well, they've got this.
They get to play the victim.
Well, there's still a question mark over what happens to this big R&D centre, isn't it, that they recently announced up in that area to do optical stuff. It's going to be the centre, I think, for European production even, I think was the plan. So no one really sort of knows what the future of that is. I mean, they will be banned from 5G. Yeah. But there's a question mark over other bits of the business and how they're affected.
I sort of think fair play to them. It's a bit like Trump with the election for just not giving up.
Yeah.
I think Trump probably should throw in the towel.
Yeah, I think so. I think everybody thinks that.
Yeah,
Trump.
But I also sort of think, well, there's nothing admirable about throwing in the towel.
Yeah.
And this is this seems to be Huawei's attitude to the UK and Europe. It's just like, we're going to keep fighting it every step of the way. We're going to make sure, and to a lesser extent, they've done this in the US. They've had legal case in the US where they've just gone, all right, you banned us. Let's examine the legality of that.
I'm actually
move.
More sympathetic to them than I am to Trump in this situation. I think he's a bit of a sore loser, whereas I think they
I largely agree.
It's becoming embarrassing.
They see they've been wronged.
No, as someone who's admitted on this podcast, I would have voted for him. I say, just all right, Trump.
Yeah.
Fair enough, mate. You gave it a good shout.
In their case, they obviously feel that this is all geopolitical and that they've had a position in this market for a long time. Then their argument is they don't have anything to do with the Chinese state. They're a private company, and therefore they feel, hard done by. And I can see if that's all true, I can sort of see why they're making a fuss about it.
Well, but even just not giving up, even if we all know that deep down, we strongly suspect that you don't. If you're a Chinese company, you're going to have, like they used to have in Soviet Russia, they'd always have a party representative on the board, making sure everyone was ideologically sort of pointing in the right direction. I'm sure that happens in China. I don't have the proof, but I bet it does. And they know that, and that's fine. But they're saying, okay, but you've got your rules. So we got our opaque rules in China, whatever they are. But you got your rules. Your rules have legal due process. Your rules have non-discrimination. Your rules have this is what's got to happen. Right. By your rules, are you right to do what you've done to us? Yeah. And I think fair enough.
Yeah.
And that's what they're doing. That's what they're doing legally in Europe, to wrap it up. And what they're doing more sort of in terms of sort of politics and propaganda through little moves like this Cambridge Wireless stuff. They're basically going, we're not going anywhere. We're going to hang around as long as it's legally viable for us to do it.
Yeah.
And if you want to pass a law that says nothing that's got Huawei written on it can ever cross the English Channel, then that's fine. And then we'll challenge that. And I sort of think fair enough to them. And I also think fair enough to the Cambridge Wireless people for just going, well, they presumably think they're the best partner for their particular project. I don't think there's a national security implication because it's a private network. It's basically, I think they call it I've forgotten, some kind of sort of test hub.
Yeah.
That's not what they call it, but the name escapes me. And Huawei's presumably offered to just front up a bunch of cutting edge kit to help them do it. And if the UK ends up being a bit better at 5G as a result of its collaboration with Huawei at this Cambridge Wireless Test Centre, that creates a bit of a paradox, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Cool, okay. I think we've gone on for well over an hour, so we should probably wrap it up there.
Ever.
Yeah.
It is. I think it probably is.
Okay, well, you've been very indulgent. You've got very disturbing socks on, Pierre.
That's my kid on it.
That's your kid. I'm not saying your kid specifically disturbing, but socks that have lots of pictures of babies.
It's not just some random child.
They were Father's Day gift.
Honestly, I mean, you'd have to see this, viewers. He's got socks with loads of pictures of babies on them.
It's a mosaic. Yeah, it's the same baby, just different pictures.
Same baby. Okay, a few different shots, a few different bits of lighting. Anyway, so on that note, thanks a lot for watching and listening. Make sure you join us for the next one.